Stephen Graham Jones' latest novel, The Only Good Indians, takes us to the Blackfeet Nation in Montana's fertile forests and the undeniable mystery and allure they hold for hunters. This is the backdrop for a stunning horror story where four Native American men come face to face with the karmic forces that will exact revenge on them for disrespecting the land and its sacred creatures. This is Book Public from Texas Public Radio. I'm Yvette Benavides. 10 years after four friends come upon an incredible scene of a massive herd of elk and cannot resist the temptation to kill them as easy prey, they realize that now retribution for that transgression has caught up with them. They've spent the last decade slowly leaving behind the culture and tradition of their Blackfeet Nation, but this earlier act remains the worst offense of them all. What emerges in this revenge story is a unique tale of horror, one full of mystery and intrigue. It's a scary story, sure, but it's also profound in what it offers to us about the ways we consider Native American life and identity. I spoke to novelist Stephen Graham Jones about his latest novel, The Only Good Indians. So just by way of introduction, maybe for our listeners who have not yet read the book, I think it's important just to say up front, there are so many threads at work here. I mean, it's a horror novel. It's literary fiction. There's high drama, but then there's some humor and there's some social commentary. But how do you set this up for people who ask you, well, what's it about?
I just say it's a slasher, and a slasher is usually a group of people commit some sort of trespass or prank or insult or crime and walk away from that day thinking everything is fine until at some point, 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, a spirit of vengeance comes back to make them atone for that in, usually pretty violent ways. And that's what The Only Good Indians is. The Only Good Indians is four guys that are out in the field after elk up on the Blackfeet Reservation in Montana. And they go too far. They do something they shouldn't do. And they walk away from that day having committed a trespass against both the elk and their tribe. And then 10 years later, something is making them pay for that. And there's a lot of basketball mixed in. That's pretty much how I sell it.
There is a lot of basketball in this, and I want to ask you about that in a little while. But the four friends here are Lewis, Ricky, Gabe, and Cassidy.
Yep.
And we see how their stories play out, but there's like this looming kind of karmic situation. So it's a slasher, right? So I guess the idea is that somebody's going to do something that's going to incite revenge. Nature strikes back, right? And so some people think of that idea as a kind of a trope, but it's so not a trope in this novel. I just see it as it's just a very unexpected thing. And is that part of the idea that what's appealing to you is that it is this horror novel at its heart, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's I consider myself a horror writer, and I wanted to write a horror novel this time out, and so that was important to me. That I did want that revenge dynamic or that closed cycle of justice to get started, which is the slasher, that closed cycle of justice. But I also knew, like, when you're writing a horror novel, it's kind of like you're in a contract with the audience. You have to, have this much gore and this much tension and try to do a jump scare or two, all that kind of stuff. And I love that. It's wonderful. I love to jump into that rule book, I guess, and then have to play by those rules.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much here that's so psychological, but I do want to ask you about the gore. You mentioned the gore. No spoilers, right? But there are scenes here that push at the readers a little bit. It doesn't stay there, right? The character of Lewis, I'm so invested in his story for about 100 and 20,
Yeah.
130 pages. It's almost half of the
Yeah.
book. I'm all in
Yeah.
and I'm invested. And then I
Hmm.
just trust these extreme scenes that close out those 130
Hmm.
pages. The tension has been so ramped up and up, and we're so roiling with him in this psychological space. But then these really gory scenes happen. So that's just part and parcel of the horror novel of the genre. But how do your other readers react to those scenes? It's tough on the stomach, right? For some readers.
Yeah, no, I think it has been. I get a lot of responses from readers saying that, right around that point, they have to put the book down for a while and reconsider whether they want to go on or go do something else for an hour or a day or something like that. And to me, that's the greatest compliment as a horror writer. If you can make someone like push the book away, then you're pulling on the right levers, story wise. And yeah, I mean, as far as gore in a story, I think what it feels to me like what gore does in a story is it launches the reader into a horror space where they know the rules don't quite hold, that the rules they've become accustomed to don't quite hold, and anything can happen. And I mean, that horror space is pretty much defined or characterized by uncertainty. And once you can like pull the rug out from the reader's feet like that and keep it out for the rest of the book, I think that's kind of when you've maybe got them, if they're kind of floating around and you are their only like tether.
I mean, there's so much about the psychological thriller aspect of it that's almost scarier to me in so many
Mm-hmm.
ways. But then, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's sort of like, okay, we know what we're walking into. But my point had been just this idea of how to stay in the novel for that space, except that I had trusted for so long and was following this character for so long that even though well, I'm just about to spoil it, so I won't say what I was going to say. I was just so invested that once that happened and I just sort of had to get my bearings a little bit, then I just plowed through. And of course, it
Yeah.
was worth it. But yeah, it's part of the deal.
Yeah.
You just sign up for that when you open up a book like this.
Yeah, it kind of is. Like if you go to a haunted house attraction, then you pay your $20 and walk through those big double doors into darkness and fog and screams, and you know that there's going to be stuff in there that's going to make you jump and make you kind of regret having walked through those double doors. But you're already through the doors, and you just got to push through till you exit. Until the person at the end chases you with that chainsaw, like it always happens.
What is it about the scary story that's so appealing to you? What is it? I mean, everybody likes that feeling, I
Yeah.
guess, of
Yeah.
of suspense and being scared. What's drawing you to that as a writer?
As a writer, I like that scary stories can provoke a visceral reaction from the reader that the reader is not necessarily willing to give. Like, I think we all do this when we go into a horror story or movie or attraction or whatever it is. We're always looking for the zippers, the things that will tell us that this is fake, that isn't a real monster, this isn't a real zombie, that kind of stuff. And on the page, you can spot a bad line or a poor transition or all the little techniques and craft stuff that can go wrong, and you can say that's a zipper. I saw that. This is not a real possession story. This is something that the writer dreamed up and is trying to foist off on me. And you can walk away from that story, that book, thinking, I saw the zipper, I'm safe. But then, 2:30 in the morning, you're going for a glass of water down the hall, and you realize that the story has actually got to you, and you're not sure you can actually walk down this dark hall without running. And that's the reaction that horror stories can do. It's like a horror story is laying eggs in your mind that don't hatch until the lights go out.
The way that speculative fiction or the horror genre works a lot of the time is with a writer who is sort of using that to tell another story, right? A more profound story. I mean, this is still a very profound story about so many other things. So it's an access point, I guess, in a way, to tell another story.
You're right. You're right in speculative genres, because I think all speculative genres, to some extent, do that. And it could be that just all stories do that. Really, it's like you have to get the reader to your story space in some way. You have to attract them, and you attract them with a big white whale, or with a trip to Mars, or with here's what my workday looks like, and once you can lure them in like that, then you can talk about I want to say big things, but I never feel like I'm talking about big things. I feel like I'm just trying to talk about real people. But when you talk about real people, then big things kind of get dressed up, I feel like.
Yeah, these are very flawed characters, and that's
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's just the stuff of great literature. So, yeah, I hear what you're saying. I guess it's hard to talk about your own work as like, oh, I'm writing about the big stuff, but it's there because these are, these are characters that we can identify with in different ways. Now, I know that you're a basketball fan. There's a lot of basketball in this novel.
Yeah.
And I just feel like it's so realistic in the ways that the backstories of the characters come into play, and then they sort of emerge in more magnified ways. There are a lot of subjects in this novel that seem researched. I don't imagine you needed to do much research on basketball, but do you really know this much about hunting or elk or lighting or do you really did you have to do a lot of research to write about those things?
No, I mean, I've been out after elk since I was 12 years old, probably, and I've been messing with janky spotlights in the ceiling for forever as well, and of course I've been playing ball forever. I'm trying to think what I did have to research. I mean, I would hit little bumps that I'd have, like with eye shine. I wanted to know in this novel whether like deer and elk and horses, whether their eye shine, like in headlights, are different tints, different colors. And instead of actually doing the research, I just texted a friend and asked, or my brother-in-law, and asked him, and he figured it all out for me. And I needed to know something about a rifle, so I texted my dad, and I needed to know something to confirm something about Browning or the reservation, so I texted a couple of friends up there. And that's generally how I do research. I either know it myself, or I can fake it convincingly, or I text somebody who knows. But doing the research myself, unless it's research for vehicles, I like to do that research myself. But the trick is, I know a whole lot about trucks and cars. But I mean, I can never be sure, like, did the 54 have a sport bumper or the 55 have a sport bumper? So I do have to research that kind of stuff, and I like it a lot.
Well, it comes through so seamlessly in the novel, right? I mean, even when Lewis is focusing on the washer, was this the top side or what side of the washer is this? I thought this is really, really specific, but it didn't push us out of the narrative. It's sort of like, and even the stuff about the bike and so on. So I just found that so interesting, and it is very seamless, and it just gives us a sense of the character and the preoccupations of the characters. And so, yeah, but I kept thinking, how does he have time to write if he's researching all this stuff? So
that you bring up the washer, because the washer goes on that Road King, that Harley that Lewis has. And I've never had a Road King. I've never had a Harley at all. And I did have to look up and figure out what year I wanted his Road King to be, and then kind of look at some of the tech specs and drill into some discussion boards to find out what people say about, this year, this model, and everything. And that was probably the most research I did for this novel, I bet.
Wow.
Motorcycle stuff. I've ridden a lot of motorcycles. I used to have a lot of friends who rode, but I've been awesome myself for probably 20 years, So that was a little bit of a research dive for me.
There's also a lot of sort of, I don't want to call it humor. Like, it's not like knee-slappingly funny but there's just this very wry, dry, with a wink, sort of tongue-in-cheek humor that comes through that is, again, it contributes to how realistically drawn these characters are. But I was looking at the titles of the chapters are the days of the week in the first part, and in the second part, there are these interesting kind of colloquially, like idiomatic expressions. I mean, even those sort of come through as like this sort of sardonic, like, one little Indian or shirts and skins. And I thought that's so interesting is not that they would go unnoticed, but they're subtle. And then some of the things that the characters say to each other. So how does the idea of humor work for you as you're creating one of your novels?
I think when you're writing horror, you have to find a pressure release valve that you can like depress every, 10 or 12, maybe 15 pages, because horror tends to escalate, or inflate, and it really quickly reaches like a plateau of shriekiness that's just flat. And anytime you have like flatness in your novel instead of spikes, then I think the reader can become bored and drift away. So with horror, you do want to have like scare, dread, uncertainty, and then have a laugh or some sort of wry aside or something like that functions to release that mounting pressure and reset things, so you can dip down and then start to climb again, and then dip down and start to climb again. And that's how I like to use humor in horror myself.
It was very welcome, I have to say. So, I want to ask you too about the women in your novel. I mean, these are very, very important characters. Peta and Denora and Shani, and so you have like these guys at the beginning, but there's no mistaking the story of the women and how important those are as well.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I kind of wanted to set it up where, like with Lewis and Peta, Lewis, in his head, he's an athlete, a basketball star, but get him on the court with Peta or in any athletic competition with Peta, and she smokes him, And I mean, because I think that's often the way it is. Like dudes, we always think that we've got this covered, we can do this, but I think that's just in our heads. I think there's always someone who can do it far better, who is far more competent.
They get right in there, in these different scenes that again, I won't talk about, that I won't spoil for the listener, but they get right in there, and it doesn't seem like it's too incredible. It's sort of like, yeah, I know women like that, so who are in certain relationships, super hardworking, or they do jobs that you might not expect, and they know things that you might not expect them to know. And so I just found that so real and at the same time so refreshing in this book.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. And I mean, if I have any guide or model for this, it's just probably all the strong women I've been lucky enough to have in my life. My wife, my mother, my grandma, my daughter,
How wonderful. That's wonderful. How has it been during the pandemic to promote this book with the world outside your home?
Oh, it's been unique. I've never had to promote solely from my office chair in front of my computer. It's a different experience for sure. But it seems to be working. Like I think it was actually less about the writers and the publishers adapting to this new model than it was about the readers finding or figuring out this new model, Because, I mean, my publicist will tell me be on Zoom at 2:30 or whatever. I can do that, but it doesn't matter if the audience, if there's not a quorum of people there to talk to or to talk with. And but I think the readers are hungry enough for interaction with each other and with the writers that, or just with books, really, I should say, that they figured out this new model almost immediately. And I think it's thanks to the readers that it's been working for me and for so many people as well. I was lucky. I was able to do one in-person event and at a local bookstore here. It was socially distanced. Everyone wore like 3 masks and everything. It was really early in the pandemic, it feels like. But it was really neat to at least get to go to one bookstore.
Oh, that's good.
As far as promoting on Zoom, like I do conventions all the time, and I have to fly to Seattle or Massachusetts or wherever, and which takes like a day of travel to get there. Then I'm at the con for a day or two. Then it's a day of travel back, which it's like a lot of time away from home, anyways. But promoting in the pandemic means that I do a panel for a convention at 7 at night, and then I sign off Zoom at 7:45, and I walk out of my study and I'm in my home, and that's really nice. I don't have to like jump on a plane and a bus and a train and all that stuff. It's really nice to be home as soon as I hit that red button.
There aren't too many silver linings, but I suppose that's one. I know you teach creative writing. And your students must see how prolific you are, but they must think your role in the graphic narrative and comic book realm is pretty cool. Do your students try to engage you in talking about those projects?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I teach comic book courses sometimes, and I'm about to start teaching a script writing course for comic books. So I'll be diving even deeper into that aspect of it. But yeah, they'll talk to me about just how the comic industry works, and I'll show them stuff that I'm working on in all its stages. We'll start out with the script, and then that'll change through the editor's input. Then we'll go to sketches and thumbnails and pencils and ink and lettering and coloring and all that stuff. And I try to keep my students involved as much as I can without breaking the trust of the people I'm working with or anything. And I hope it gives them a angle into the industry that they wouldn't have otherwise had. That's always my goal, to give them a leg up into finding their own way.
I heard something you said in an interview where you talked about how impressed you are with your students and all their talents and all that they know, but that you were going to be quite insistent on that they know where to put the comma. It's like there are certain things that you really want to arm them with. I mean, so the practical knowledge that you're giving them in engaging them in the graphic narrative world, but then also just the importance of getting their work out there, work that's clean and clearly communicates. And I was just so struck by that idea.
Yeah, well, I mean, editors or flush file readers, when they're looking at a stack of manuscripts, they don't dive into it looking for gold. They dive into it looking to make it shorter. And the first means they have for thinning that herd is mistakes, the easy mistakes, the missed commas, the mechanical errors, the lapses in formatting, that kind of stuff. And if they see that on the first page, then they can put that story in the recycle bin and move on to the next one that much faster. And everybody wants to get more and more done, of course. So yeah, they're not looking in that initial stage. They're not looking for gold. They're looking for reasons to throw your stuff away. And so I tell my students, don't give people an excuse to throw your stuff away.
Yeah, I appreciate that so much. I think that's good advice. What do you make of the way the needle has moved? Maybe kind of imperceptibly, but it's moved around making right the great wrongs in cultural appropriation, for example, tearing down monuments that have glorified some tremendous wrongs in our country. And that it's happened in 2020 in the wake of the killing of George Floyd, in the middle of a pandemic, right? Do you think about your work in 2020 as in some ways helping tear down these monuments and contributing to a new narrative? Do you look at your writing life that way?
I do always feel like I'm pushing back against something. I feel like it's not specific to 2020. I hope I've been doing it since my first novel back in 2000. But I always remember one of my philosophy professors was talking about a certain philosopher and explaining him to us, and he said this guy like imagine the establishment is a huge like stone column, and this guy is a little cartoon character, infinitesimally small at the base of that column, and he's trying to punch that establishment and knock it over, and he's just hurting himself doing it over and over, but he's not going to quit punching. And I think a lot of writers feel like that's where we are. You know, the establishment is this big formidable column, but you just got to hit it at the base over and over and over until something breaks. And if enough of us are trying to do that, maybe it'll topple.
Stephen, thank you so much for your time and for talking to me today.
Oh, thank you. It's been wonderful talking. Thanks for having me.
Stephen Graham Jones is the author of The Only Good Indians. He's also the Ivana Baldwin Professor of English at the University of Colorado, Boulder. This has been Book Public on Texas Public Radio. Write to us at bookpublic@tpr.org. Jacob Rosati composed our theme music. Our digital producer is Bree Kirkham. Dan Katz is Texas Public Radio's news director. I'm Yvette Benavides.